The morning had started like any other, with sunbeams sneaking through the blinds and laughter bouncing off the living room walls. But by nightfall, the laughter was gone, swallowed by a silence too heavy for a 10-year-old boy like Eli to understand. His father's sudden death shattered their world like a dropped glass vase, sharp, sudden, and impossible to piece together. One moment he was there, flipping pancakes and telling jokes. The next he was gone. No one explained much. They just cried, whispered, and tried to hush Eli's questions. All Eli knew was that the world no longer felt safe. Laura, Eli's mother, was once the kind of woman who made a house feel like a home. She filled rooms with warmth, her humming in the kitchen, her smile over breakfast, her way of tucking in the corners of his blanket like magic. But grief changes people. It twisted Laura from a woman of light into someone who moved like a shadow. Eli watched her sit for hours at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a coffee cup she never drank. Then came the day she stood by the hallway with packed bags, her voice steady but eyes far away. Just for a while, she told Eli and his little sister Mara. Mama needs to breathe. Where are you going? Mara had asked, her small hand clutching their mother's sleeve. Home, Laura said. But just for a little while. Eli didn't understand what she meant. They were home. But he said nothing, just stared as she walked away. Weeks passed. Then months. Then birthdays. Their mom called sometimes, her voice thin like paper over the phone line. She would ask, how's school? But never stayed long enough for real answers. Eventually, Eli stopped waiting for her voice. Mr. and Mrs. Nelson, longtime friends of the family, took them in. They smiled a lot and said things like, make yourselves at home. But it never felt that way. Their house was too clean. Too quiet. Their guest room had new sheets and matching pillows, but it lacked the lived-in warmth of Eli's old room. The one that still smelled like Dad's aftershave. At night, Eli would lie in bed, listening to Mara breathe beside him, and wonder what he had done wrong to make his mother leave. What if I had been better? He whispered one night. Would she have stayed? Mrs. Nelson sometimes found him crying in the dark. She would sit beside him, brushing his hair back, saying, it's not your fault, sweetheart. Some grown-ups break in ways children can't fix. But her voice couldn't fill the hole his mother had left. Eli carried that emptiness like a secret, growing heavier with each passing year. Years passed, but the wound remained. Eli grew taller, stronger, but the ache in his chest lingered. He became the kind of boy who checked the clock when others forgot, who over-apologized, who clung tightly to the people who stayed. Mrs. Nelson told him often, you don't have to carry the weight of what your mother couldn't handle. But Eli didn't know any other way. He buried his longing under responsibility, packing his sister's lunch, folding the laundry, doing well in school. He learned how to become needed, because maybe being needed would mean never being left again. Mara adapted in her own quiet way. She giggled more easily than Eli, smiled with less hesitation. But he could tell she was just better at pretending. She never mentioned their mom, but sometimes Eli caught her sniffing an old scarf that Laura had left behind, tucked secretly in her drawer. Eli took on the role of protector, even when he didn't know how. He made sure she got home safely, helped with homework, and held her hand during storms. Sometimes he felt more like her father than her brother. It wasn't fair, but it was their life. Eli carried his past into adulthood, even if he didn't realize it. He dated but never deeply. He laughed, but not fully. Every potential partner came up short, not because they were lacking, but because he never let them close enough to stay. Then he met Raina. It started with coffee, then conversations, then shared silences that didn't feel empty. Raina didn't push, didn't probe. She just sat beside him with quiet understanding, letting him talk when he was ready. She was his first exhale in years. It was during one of those golden summer evenings when Eli finally opened up. They sat on a park bench, watching children chase bubbles while the sun dipped low behind the trees. Raina turned to him, her eyes soft. Tell me about your family, she said gently. And so he did. He told her about his father's laughter, his mother's sorrow, and the silence that moved in when love moved out. He spoke of birthdays spent staring at the phone, and the aching quiet of Christmas mornings. She listened, fingers entwined with his, never once looking away. Raina didn't offer hollow comfort. She didn't try to fix it. Instead, she shared her own pain, of growing up without grandparents, of feeling like an only island in a sea of happy family photos. Her voice was calm, steady, kind. That night, Eli realized that healing didn't always look like forgetting. It could be sharing. And Raina, in her quiet, resilient way, offered a place for all his broken pieces. That's when Eli knew. She wasn't just someone he loved. She was someone who could love the parts of him that still hurt. Eli and Raina got married on a rainy spring afternoon. The clouds didn't bother them. In fact, the gentle drizzle made everything feel soft and sacred. As they exchanged vows, Eli glanced at the empty chair reserved for his mother. She had said she couldn't travel that far, but he knew better. It wasn't distance, it was discomfort. Still, he held Raina's hands tightly, promising her what he wished someone had promised him as a child. I won't leave. Later, at the reception, Raina whispered, she'll come around. In her own time. Eli nodded, but in his heart he wasn't sure. Laura did visit once, months after the wedding, just after their first child was born. Eli had called her, voice trembling with joy. You're a grandma, he said. Come meet her. She came with gifts and nervous smiles, stepping lightly into their home like someone trespassing on sacred ground. Raina was gracious. She offered tea, asked polite questions, and even handed the baby over without hesitation. But there was a quiet tension that hung in the air, subtle but unmistakable. Eli felt it in the way Raina stood a little straighter, and how his mother blinked too much when she smiled. Over time, Laura visited occasionally, usually for birthdays or holidays. She brought thoughtful gifts, commented on how much the children had grown, and always hugged Eli tightly before leaving. Raina remained courteous but distant. She smiled when needed, made conversation where expected, but never let down her guard. She means well, Eli would say afterward. I know, Raina would answer, her voice calm. But meaning well doesn't erase what happened. Eli couldn't argue. Both women were right in their own way, but that didn't make things any easier. Eli lived between two emotional landscapes, one shaped by a mother who left, and one shaped by a wife who stayed. Balancing both felt like walking a tightrope. He tried to be the bridge, the peacekeeper, the translator of old wounds and present misunderstandings. At times, he felt pulled in two directions, one bound by history, the other by hope. She's trying, he'd tell Raina. So am I, Raina would reply. And it was true. But sometimes, trying wasn't enough. He longed for a moment when both women could see each other fully. Not as opposites, but as survivors of different kinds of loss. When Eli planned a trip back to his home country with the kids, Raina encouraged him. Her work schedule wouldn't allow her to go, and truthfully, she seemed relieved. They'll love it, she said, packing snacks and matching socks into their bags. Are you sure? Eli asked. She nodded, kissing his cheek. They need to know where you come from. Eli knew this was her way of supporting him, even if it came with emotional distance. He kissed her goodbye, holding her longer than necessary. Then he boarded the plane with his children, unaware of the storm waiting back home. Eli hadn't set foot in his mother's home in years. It was different now, new paint, unfamiliar furniture, but the air still smelled like childhood. His mother, Laura, welcomed them with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The children ran to her, excited and curious. She clung to them like lifelines. For a few days, things went smoothly. Laura took them to parks and markets, told stories from Eli's youth, and filled each day with laughter. Eli let himself relax, just a little, forgetting the weight he carried. The illusion shattered one evening. Eli had just tucked the kids into bed when he heard his wife's name drift from the kitchen. He paused on the stairs, unseen but listening. His aunt's voice was sharp. She thinks she's better than us. She hides it well, Laura murmured in reply. Eli froze. His heart sank. His wife, Raina, had bent over backwards trying to be respectful. She stayed quiet not from pride, but fear of overstepping. Hearing them reduce her care to snobbery felt like betrayal. He stepped forward, his shadow breaking the light. Their eyes widened. I heard what you said, Eli said, his voice steady but cold. His aunt waved it off. You're taking it too seriously. No, he replied. I'm taking it exactly as seriously as I should. Laura looked away, shame flickering across her face. She's just different, she said softly. She's careful, Eli snapped. Not condescending. The room turned quiet. His chest heaved with unspoken frustrations. Years of being caught between them. She resents you, he added finally. Because you left. Not because you're poor. Because you weren't there when we needed you. The silence deepened. No one argued. Laura lowered her glass slowly. The lines in her face deepened, her expression hollow. I know I failed you, she said. But I didn't think she'd hate me for it. She doesn't hate you, Eli replied, exhausted. She just protects me. Because someone had to. His aunt stood quietly, arms crossed, but even her face softened. There was no screaming, no apology big enough to bridge the years. Just quiet grief sitting between them. Eli excused himself and left the room, the chill of unspoken pain still clinging to his skin. On the porch, Eli messaged his sister Mara. They were talking about Raina again, he typed. Like she's arrogant. Mara's reply came instantly. Just apologize and move on. It's not worth it. That had always been Mara's way. Make peace, avoid conflict. But Eli didn't want peace built on silence. He needed his mother and aunt to see who Raina really was, not just the person they assumed. She tries, he replied. They don't see it. And it hurts. He stared at the screen, unsure what to say next. Some wounds didn't scab. They just stayed raw, invisible to everyone but those who carried them. Lying in the guest bed that night, Eli couldn't sleep. He stared at the same ceiling he had once as a boy, wondering why love had to be so complicated. He thought of Raina, how she always checked twice if someone was comfortable, how she memorized his mother's favorite tea brand just to make her feel seen. None of that mattered, it seemed. One polite distance was all it took for them to judge her. Maybe it wasn't really about Raina. Maybe she reminded them of everything they weren't. And maybe that scared them. The next morning, Laura sat by the garden, sipping her coffee quietly. Eli joined her, neither of them speaking for a while. Then she said, she loves you a lot. He nodded. I know. I didn't mean what I said, she whispered. But sometimes, it's easier to criticize what you don't understand than to admit you feel left out. Eli looked at her, surprised. You feel left out? She makes you whole in a way I never could, Laura admitted. And that's hard to watch. For the first time, Eli saw her not as the mother who left, but as the woman who had lost, too. That afternoon, Eli called Raina. He sat on the porch steps, the kids playing in the background. I overheard something last night, he began. Her voice tensed. What happened? He told her everything. The assumptions. The words. The silence that followed. Raina didn't speak right away. Then she sighed, deep and long. I'm not surprised, she said. But I'm still hurt. I know. I tried to defend you. I know that too. They stayed quiet, listening to each other's breathing. Then Raina added, thank you for telling me. And thank you for standing up for me. Before Eli left to return home, Laura asked to speak to the kids. She sat them down and told them stories about when Eli was little, how he used to hide under the table during thunderstorms, how he once cried when his sandwich had the crust on. Later, as they packed, Laura helped fold their clothes. She looked at Eli and said, tell Raina I'd like to talk. Just the two of us. Eli blinked. Really? I think I've misunderstood her. Maybe she misunderstood me too. It wasn't a resolution. But it was something better than silence. On the plane back, Eli watched his children sleep, their heads leaning on each other. He thought about how far he'd come. How pain, when ignored, only hardens, but when shared, sometimes softens. He had no idea what the future held for his wife and mother. But he knew he would no longer mediate in silence. At home, Raina met them at the airport. She hugged the kids first, then looked at Eli with searching eyes. He smiled softly. She wants to talk to you. Raina blinked. Then she nodded. Okay, let's talk. 2 days later, Laura called. Raina picked up. Hello. There was a pause. Hi, this is Laura. Eli's mom. Raina's voice was even. I know. Another pause. Then Laura said, I wanted to apologize. For the things I said. And the things I didn't say. I was wrong about you. Reina sat down, holding the phone close. Thank you for saying that. I think I just felt invisible. Like I lost my son twice. First to grief, then to someone I didn't understand. Reina closed her eyes. And I felt judged for being who I am. For not being you. That was the beginning. They talked for almost an hour. Not about shoes or recipes or surface things, but about grief, motherhood, fear, and pride. Reina admitted how hard she had tried to fit in. How every word she said around Laura had been weighed, measured, softened. Laura confessed that Reina's confidence had reminded her of everything she had once lost in herself. I thought you looked down on me, she said. I didn't, Reina replied. I looked up to you. But I was scared of stepping on toes I didn't know were there. For the first time, they heard each other. Eli walked into the room that evening to find Reina staring at her phone, smiling. Was that? He asked. She nodded. We talked. Eli sat beside her, hesitant. Good talk. Better than I expected. They didn't need to say more. There were no fireworks, no tearful breakthroughs. But it was a start, an honest beginning that didn't rely on Eli to play the bridge. He leaned in and kissed her forehead. Thank you, he whispered. Reina chuckled. Don't thank me yet. We'll see how Christmas goes. Months later, Laura visited them, not just for a short weekend, but for a full week. She brought a small scrapbook for the kids, filled with photos of Eli as a boy. She sat with Reina in the kitchen, helping with dinner. They didn't become best friends overnight, but the tension was gone. One evening, Laura and Reina sat on the porch, wine glasses in hand. Silence was safer than saying the wrong thing. Reina smiled. I used to think politeness was the same as respect. They both laughed softly. Eli watched from the doorway, smiling. His two worlds, once sharp-edged and brittle, now resting gently side by side. It had taken years of misunderstandings, emotional landmines, and one overheard conversation to crack the surface. But now healing came in quiet moments. Reina asking Laura to help with dessert. Laura reaching over to tuck a blanket around one of the kids. No speeches. Just gestures. Eli had once thought healing would come like lightning. But he now saw that it arrived more like morning light. Soft, steady, and slow.
Every story carries a lesson. If this one moved you, tap subscribe so you never miss the next twist in the journey.